first, a thank you and a disclaimer. Funding for this program was provided through a grant from the Florida Humanities with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Florida Humanities or the National Endowment for the Humanities. So, why community journalism? We're going through rapid change. Social media and the wholesale investors, the Zuckermans and the Musks that own them, are the winners of a 2-decade-long war. Social media now suck up the content produced by us professional journalists, most of it without pay, and in the process, they're sucking the life and dollars out of traditional news businesses that used to employ us, the professional journalists. Local news outlets are shrinking. We have lost 1/3 of newspapers in the United States since 2005. We can count ourselves lucky here because we still have one daily. They've been shrinking. Newsrooms have been shrinking drastically, and we've lost 2/3 of journalism jobs since 2005. There are lots of us who now work in marketing or in public relations, but no more journalism. And then there's community journalism. There's a whole new ecosystem that's populated by a wide variety of strange news animals. Some of them have been around for a while, such as NPR. Others appear, and some of them disappear very quickly, but many do have staying power. What I can say is this. This community news thing is here to stay. I've been really involved I've been in the middle of the creation of this local news organization, WSLR News. I was totally absorbed, and I always thought, man, am I lucky that we have this odd kind of news organization here that is expanding. But then I went to a conference in Washington last year about nonprofit news, and what I realized is that this is a phenomenon. It's a movement, it's a social movement, and it's a movement that is building institutions that are going to be around. So we're at a point where community journalism has actually become a buzzword. Everybody claims to be a community journalist and to cover community news. It's a little bit like being middle class. In the United States, everyone claims to be middle class. So we have with us today 3 representatives of news organizations that are truly community news, that are practicing community journalism. And I'd love you to give them a hand, please. First, matter of process. After the panelists have their moment, it'll be your turn. That's a big part of our not-so-hidden agenda here. We want you to move beyond just being news consumers. We want you to think along the lines of, how could this be done better? How could my family, my neighborhood, my peers, my work colleagues be served better? And we don't mind to hear, too, your ideas about how we could generate revenue streams that would make us more sustainable. But most importantly, we would like you to become news producers yourselves. So, to our panelists. First round, we would like you to give a chance to describe the news organization you're working for, just in general terms. And we will begin with our guest from Connecticut, Indira, where she co-owns and helps run the longest-standing African-American newspaper in that state. Meet Indira Allen Stevens, one of the unstoppable forces behind North End Agents, Hartford's iconic newspaper. As a Gen Z co-owner, Indira brings a fresh perspective and unwavering passion to the table, inherited from a family legacy steeped in journalistic excellence. Born and bred in the heartbeat of the newspaper industry, Indira and her sisters have been ingrained with the secrets of the trade since childhood. Now, as the torchbearers of North End Agents, they continue a tradition of half a century blazing new trails and amplifying diverse voices in the media landscape. Indira's official title may be Growth Manager, but her impact transcends titles. From wielding the pen as an editorial assistant to mastering the digital realm as a social media maven, she's a dynamic force driving the newspaper's evolution and outrage. With that, go ahead, Indira.
Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, I don't know. Hearing that said back, it's kind of nerve-wracking. Okay. So just a little bit of history on our newsroom. Our newsroom is turning 50 years this year, which is huge for us. My dad, John Robert Allen, started the newspaper in 1974. It was started on a bit of a dare. So he had just gotten out of the military and he was doing the delivery routes for a couple of newsrooms. And so one of the newspapers he was working at in Springfield, Mass, he was saying, hey, like, we need to get this paper out on time. And the newspaper editor said, well, if you think you can do better, then why don't you do it? And my dad is a man who never backs down from a challenge. So he took that dare, and within a couple of weeks, he got things moving. He engaged his community of people to gather around him and help him to create it. He asked our cousin, Jonathan, to create our logo. He tapped in Juan Fuentes for photography and help with the layout. And then he was able to work with the Chronicle, which is a little bit tough to do when you're in a white male-dominated industry. You're dealing with racism. This is 1974. So he definitely had to push his way in and had to learn from the ground up. So from then till the 2000s, we were actually still laying out our paper with the X-Acto knife and that glue, which is so freaking awesome. I love the little paintbrush on the end. It just gets me excited. But my dad, he started the newspaper with the intent to support people in the North End and really bring a conversation space between politicians and local government and our community members. So he started a thing where community members would write letters to local politicians and they would respond back in the paper. And then that back and forth started to happen, and you started to see a bridge kind of connecting us there. He also did initiatives around kids going back to school. So he worked on Blue Hills. So there was hair salons, there was barbershops on the same strip, there was a pizza shop, and he made sure everybody on that strip got money. So he made sure the kids got their hair cut before they went back to school because your appearance matters. He made sure they got their hair done, and he sent them across the street to get free pizza, and also made sure they had all of their school supplies that they needed to go back to school. And then he met my mom, and my mom actually began working in the paper as well. She started off doing a graphic design, which I actually started off doing too. And she pitched some ideas, and he was like, "Oh, this girl is really making money," and that's how he would say it. He would say, "This girl is really making money." So he was like, "I'm gonna work with her." And she had us, me and my sister, in '98, and she thought she was going to go sit in the house and be a housewife. And so he was talking to my Aunt Elise, and he said, that girl thinks she's going to go sit in the house and be a housewife. She is not going to be no housewife. She is coming out here to work with me on the paper. And that's what she did. During her era, because she took over for my dad when he got sick, she revamped the education edition and how we see it today, even though my dad did start it. She brought us into the digital age, so we were no longer laying out by the X-Acto knife anymore. And yeah, she really just kickstarted all of our growth and evolution. And me and my sister are now taking it over in 2015. And yeah, we're really excited to be here and also to be tussling with this dragon of news in this day and age. So yeah, that's a little bit about us.
And you're covering Hartford, Connecticut, the city, or do you go beyond?
Yes. Okay. So we cover the greater Hartford area. So that's Hartford and its surrounding towns. We have a 40,000 print circulation in Connecticut. And then we also have our website and our newsletter, as well as social media as well.
Thank you, Indira. Next is the executive editor of one of those new kinds of animals in the news ecosystem, the Community News Collaborative right here in Sarasota. Eric Garwood has been a community journalist since the day in 1980. He walked into the Newport Richey office of the St. Petersburg Times. 5 months before he graduated from high school, he was seeking career advice. Eric has been a City Hall reporter, a sports writer, a copy editor and page designer, a supervising editor from one end of the newsroom to the other. He's covered local governments, space launches, a seaport, military matters, sailing, professional golf, and pretty much any other kind of news story that came along. He does not believe in the notion of a slow news day. Eric has been a part of 4 extras, the last in 2016, and has yelled, "Stop the presses," twice, and they did. Before coming to Sarasota in 2017 as managing editor of the Sarasota and Longboat Observers, he worked for 25 years in Melbourne for Florida Today. That's the Gannett Company newspaper next to the Kennedy Space Center. He's also worked in North Carolina and for a weekly newspaper on the East Coast of Florida. Eric is a 1984 graduate of the University of South Florida. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you. Indira's right. Hearing that said out loud is a little bit unnerving. It sounds like it was my obit or something like that. So Johannes is right. I'm working right now at the Community News Collaborative, and I don't know if much of y'all have heard of this. You've probably read our stuff in pretty much any piece of media that you've picked up around Sarasota and Bradenton. We were launched about a year ago. Our mission, we're grant funded, we're nonprofit, we operate under the auspices of WUSF, but we're independent in that regard. Our mission is to zig where everybody else zags. As Johannes said, newsrooms ain't what they used to be. When I started, it wouldn't be unusual to have 100 reporters in a newsroom. Now, if you can find 20, you're lucky. Something had to give, and our mission is to essentially do those stories that nobody can do anymore. We've focused in our first year a lot on environment. I should say that the content that we produce, we give free of charge to, I think it's 12 different media outlets in Manatee County, Sarasota County, and DeSoto County. So we have done, like I said, a lot of environmental news. We have done a lot of community news that I think otherwise might not have gotten done. We pay particular eye on DeSoto County because that is what we in the business call a news desert. There is literally no media in that county at all. So whatever we do, we look at as something better, something that wouldn't have gotten done otherwise. We operate, I have an office on Lime Avenue. I've got 3 reporters who work for me. We do radio, we do print. We've appeared on ABC7, chatting with hosts about some of the stories that we've done. We do a little bit of everything. And like I said, we try to, we're not here to compete with everybody. Like I said, the last word in our title is collaborative, not competitive. We're not out trying to beat the Herald Tribune to a county commission story. We're trying to kind of look and see what they're doing and then run off and go in the opposite direction. It's incredibly exciting. It's incredibly fun and different and something that I've never been a part of. So I hope you're reading us, and I hope you're seeing what we can do. Thanks.
We're one of the beneficiaries of your existence,
Right.
and we appreciate it very much. This is the new approach to sharing, to collaborate. We are using the news they produce, the radio version of your news. So thank you for that introduction. Last but not least, Carrie Sheridan is a reporter for WUSF, the NPR member station covering Sarasota, St. Pete, and Tampa. And she's a local host of the afternoon news magazine, All Things Considered. Carrie covers health, education, and the environment. Sometimes her local stories are picked up by NPR and aired on the national broadcast, like a story she did earlier this month about a choir that pairs people with dementia with professional singers from Key Chorale right here in Sarasota. Prior to joining WUSF in 2019, she was a wire service reporter for 14 years for the French news agency Agence France Presse, AFP, working in the Middle East and in Washington. She earned a graduate degree in journalism from Columbia University, where she happened to be a student on 9/11, and wrote a book about the aftermath through the lens of the New York City Fire Department musicians that played at hundreds of funerals, called Bagpipe Brothers. So with that, go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you. It's just so wonderful to be here and be on this panel with you two, and the things that you've been talking about. We just feel like we're of the same cloth, I think, reporters. We sort of think a different way. We love different things. One of my first job in a newspaper was actually an Irish community newspaper in San Francisco that came out once a month, and we had 3 people on staff, and we used to paste it together, and I used to deliver the papers in the back of my 1987 BMW, which I bought secondhand from someone, up and down all these hills in San Francisco, and it was just, you just love it. I don't know, you just love it. You love meeting the people, you love talking to them, and I worked in international journalism for a while, 14 years, and I decided that I really wanted to come back into local journalism because it is so important. Sometimes reporters, they like to be heard, they like to be read by the widest audience possible, but the things that really matter are the things that are sometimes small or sometimes that happen in a community that affect people that nobody's talking about. And I really was excited to join WUSF for an opportunity to cover more of those kinds of local news, things that really affect people. So WUSF is the NPR station for this area. We try to cover a range of different issues, with our main mission just being to inform the public. Anything that we do, we're trying not to sensationalize, we try not to jump on the bandwagon, although they certainly have to cover certain things that other people cover, but to give a context to the news and to try to educate and inform through the news coverage that we do.
Thank you, Carrie.
You're welcome.
So the next question, and this is the reason we're here, community journalism. So how would you describe who you are working for, who you are producing news for, how you define community news, and who you talk about, who you cover? And Dara, you get to start.
Yay, I get to go first again. Okay. Okay, so our newsroom, it covers the Black and Brown experience in Connecticut, but also across the U.S. And during COVID, we actually had the opportunity to work with journalists outside of the country too, which was really cool because we were able to kind of track what the global Black and Brown experience was during COVID. It was, I think our readers needed to see that it wasn't just them having this one experience, and we got to broaden their view a little bit of what other people were experiencing outside of the U.S., which was very cool. So we like to cover lifestyle, politics, We are doing climate justice, agriculture news, because farming is the thing now. Um, and we just cover what's happening in our community, how our people feel, and just giving them a space to really represent their voice, because it's completely unfiltered when it comes into North and Asians. So yeah.
One of the things that really caught my attention is you leave the police beat to the Hartford Courant. Why is that?
So we originally started off as a weekly publication, but we shifted to a bi-monthly publication. And so by the time you get our newspaper, you probably already know all of the daily things that are happening. So when you come to us, you kind of want something to savor on a little bit longer, something that kind of makes you think. And so we're not going to give you the regular daily news. We're going to give you something deeper. And we say for our newsroom that we don't print negative news. And for us, that means that we do print what's happening in the world, but we are not leaving our readers trapped and stranded in a state of fear, because that's what often happens in communities of color. And we are not interested in fear mongering. So, right, sorry, saw someone I knew. Okay, so we challenge all of our journalists to give us a call to action, a change in perspective, or hey, look over here, there's more resources and information that you can look at. So yeah.
Thank you. Eric, how would you define community journalism and how do you cover it?
I think it's like one of those things where you, as far as I'm concerned, we could easily say that we could stand on the county line and turn our backs on everything else. We're in business. Our job is to report on things that are going on locally. I think a good way to talk about it is from an editor's perspective and wonder, sometimes the cynic in the business would look at a story and say, nah, that's not anything we'd want to do. I think the right way to do it is to turn it around and say, how can we do a story on something and not repeat ourselves, not repeat what everybody else has done, yet bring a fresh perspective to something that may have already been written about dozens and dozens of times. I'll use an example of a story that we recently published on traffic roundabouts. And yeah.
The most controversial issue in Sarasota.
Exactly. It's almost a guaranteed winner, except that everybody has done a million. So we kicked it around in the office one day, and I came up with the idea, why don't we go talk to a bunch of driving instructors and ask them, what are they teaching their students who probably have never dealt with these things before? And we learned a couple things. A, young people get scared of them, even though they've never driven a car, because their parents are scared of them. We learned about one driving school that one of their students actually crashed into somebody in a roundabout while taking a lesson in driving around roundabouts. So a lot of times it's a matter of there's a big story, there's a big topic, there's a big issue beyond your borders. Not my problem. My problem is to figure out a way that I can get that issue front and center to local people with a local perspective to make it make sense and make it relevant to them. Everyone can read whatever they want, wherever they want on the internet in terms of broad national or international coverage. You can only do the local thing locally, and to me, that's what our job is.
Thank you, Eric. So what about WUSF? You guys are covering a pretty wide region. So how can you stay
Yeah.
local? What is your focus?
It's a huge challenge, I think, because the area is so big. And I think in Sarasota, we can feel like Tampa is just very far away. And sometimes I hear things on the radio and I'm like, it doesn't feel like it's my story because it's in Tampa. It doesn't necessarily resonate. So it's really interesting.
You're
how
actually
small-
based here?
I'm based in Sarasota. Yeah, we actually have 2 reporters in Sarasota because we wanted to broaden out, having reporters live in the community is just so helpful to covering it, obviously. You can't cover Sarasota from Tampa. And I can't cover Tampa from here. So it's just so interesting to listen to you two with your perspectives because I worked in such a hard-nosed newsroom for so many years where anything that we covered, it had to be international, it had to be brand new, it had to be groundbreaking. So many things are dismissed, like, oh, already heard it, already published that study, we already know about this. That local journalism is so fun because there are all these really interesting things that happen that now I get a chance to talk about them and write about them. But the narrowing it down and kind of refining how you're going to do it, that's a big challenge. One thing that we do is we kind of divide it into categories. So we have transportation, we have environment, climate change, agriculture, business and economy, health and education. And our reporters get together with editors and just kind of brainstorm things, ideas that we're hearing from the community or things that we are seeing as a trend. Sometimes NPR has regular calls from the mothership with like local reporters on a certain beat. So I'm on the education team. So once a week I'm on a call with a few NPR editors and reporters and NPR education reporters from member stations all across the country. And that's really a really invaluable resource because we can all talk about trends that we're seeing or, I was listening to a school board workshop not too long ago where they were talking about coming up with a new way to do threat assessments for children who might be problems in school and how could we address that from a perspective of intervening before the problem really becomes a problem. And I said, guys, they were talking about this in a school board workshop, and they say it's the first time, Florida's the first place that's ever enacted this kind of program. And they're all like, yeah, right, and then a couple of reporters talked about how their states have already done this, and they told me what they've learned. And it's just such a great education, to cover education in that way. And NPR does that with the climate desk and the health desk as well. So we have regular kind of check-ins about that.
Thank you. So before going to you guys, one more question, and that is, let's try to work a little bit on the tensions that you're working under. Can you give us examples of issues you think community journalism should be covering, but you cannot because of constraints, or an example of your listeners or readers telling you, we would like you to cover this, but you cannot for one reason or another. So I don't know who would like to go first about these kinds of tensions.
One thing that I've always been a big news fan of, and I've tried to sort of spread that to the reporters who I work with, is all the president's men coined the phrase "follow the money," and it meant something very specific. I don't necessarily mean that that's always the case, but wherever there's money involved, there is a community or a local news story to be had. I think everybody in this room pays taxes. Everybody in this room would love to know how those taxes are being spent. So I make it a point when I work with one of our reporters to ask them, what did that cost and where did it come from? And very often that ends up being a sentence or two. It's not the whole story. It's not, sometimes maybe I guess it could be, but generally speaking, it's just a couple of sentences somewhere in the middle of the story that kind of points to me and says, see, we're listening to you. We're telling you that the beach renourishment project that will be gone in 15 years and will be have to done all over again is going to cost $62 million. and you're paying for it whether you like it or not. And whether it's that or whether it's a simple matter of the bus service in Sarasota County and how that works and where the money comes from, I kind of always think that the big common denominator in all of that is money and how it gets spent and where it came from.
And are there any constraints that stop you from taking that angle in your coverage?
Except for the fact that journalists are probably the worst math people in the world. Yeah. It's often something that especially inexperienced folks shy away from because a budget is a scary thing to tackle. Until you sort of know where to look and know how to, it's all public records and it shouldn't be hard to find. It's all there in black and white, generally speaking. It's just a matter of digging it out sometimes and knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know and being willing to ask and learn more about what you don't know so you can present it to a reader or a listener in a way that they'll understand. If you don't understand it, they're not going to understand it.
Thanks, Eric. The constraints we're working under, is there anything you would like to bring up?
Do you want to go first?
No.
Okay. I have some. I can share some. I have some thoughts on this.
Go ahead.
One of the problems that we run into is we will make a public records request or FOIA something. Can give you a little example. It's right here in Sarasota County. I thought might be interesting to look into, I'm a parent of kids in middle school. We get this letter that says, if you would like to opt your children out of library school materials, please check this box, fill it out, send it back. And I wonder how many people actually fill this out. I'd be interested to find out how many people in Sarasota County actually don't want their children to read books in the library. Sorry, I just need a moment. Okay. So then I was told I had to put in a FOIA for it, so I did, and then the FOIA came back, we are not tracking that information. So I went back to the PIO and I said, what do you mean? They tell me they're not tracking it at the school board level. How would you suggest I find this out? And she was like, well, I don't know. I mean, if they're not tracking it, then we don't have a record of it. And I mean, you could call every high school or middle school principal and see if they want to answer because the sheets probably go right directly to the schools. So is that something that I have the time or resources to do at that point? That's sort of like I don't know if I can do that story then.
You're by yourself. You don't
Yeah,
have
that would take a
any
long
backup
time to do it that way. And in a way, I kind of don't believe that nobody knows this, but you're told nobody knows the answer to that question. So there's a bit of bureaucracy that you run into that is very frustrating. You make a FOIA request and you think it's going to come back with this like jackpot of a story, and it's like not what you wanted, or it's very heavily redacted, right? We had that experience recently in Sarasota with the police report that was just completely blacked out except for a few words, So on occasion I've called an NPR investigative reporter and said, I've got this situation, what do you think I should do? And they'll try to help, but it can be very daunting to cover these things when we don't have an investigative team. And my editor would like for me to do a story once in a while, so I can't really just dive completely into, one rabbit hole after another.
Thank you, Carrie. And Dara, the
Okay.
constraints.
Yeah, I get to go last. Okay, so in my career, I haven't really been met with a lot of constraints. If there's an area that I want to cover around journalism, my older sister, Sasha, she's usually pretty open to it. We'll sit down, we'll discuss it, and decide what angle we want to go from, and then we'll start finding the proper writer to kind of roll that idea out. So honestly, everything we kind of want to touch and really want to touch right now, we can. Of course, politics is always a touchy subject, but yeah.
Wow. Can I work for you guys? All right. So now
We are
it's
accepting writers, just so you know.
I have another one, though, that I think you're probably going to get to next, though, but that is also sources. We need people to talk to us. Sometimes people won't talk. And I know people have things to say, but they're afraid to talk. They don't want to go on the record. Or, but you can always go on background. If you know something that you think we should know about, you can call up a reporter and say, I know about something that you should know about, and I may have documents, or I may have firsthand knowledge. And if you're talking to a reputable news organization, we go to jail to cover our sources. We don't reveal our sources, So if you had something that you wanted to be covered, you should call up a reporter and talk about it. One other last thing that I've noticed in this job is sometimes, though, people want us to solve their problems for them. Like maybe it's an employment situation, they were fired perhaps wrongly. I've heard that a few times. It's always compelling. It's always, something very compelling, but it's very hard for us to investigate things like that. Or sometimes things that really need an investigation, we need a good source on the record. And if people call and say that there's children being abused at this school, but I can't go on the record, well, we can't do anything about it. So think about that as members of the community, that if you can encourage people to trust in the media, and share what they know, you can remain anonymous to a degree. I don't mean to be confusing about it, but it definitely does help if you can go on the record as well, because then we don't have to jump through so many hoops.
And if I can just add one thing to Carrie, as the resident dinosaur up here at the dais, believe it or not, there was a time where if you wanted to talk to the planning director of the city of Sarasota, you got on the phone and you called the planning director of the city of Sarasota and you interviewed him or her. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen anymore anywhere. There are often 2 or 3 layers of comms department people who you have to almost justify and sing for your supper to the point that now maybe we'll grant you an interview with and I use the planning director as an example. I feel that people are far less apt to talk to you than they were even 15 or 20 years ago. It's just a much different landscape.
That's right. So now it's your turn. This is a two-way street. News is a two-way street. And I would like you to focus now on the question on what you think community news journalists could be doing, should be doing. What do we cover? What do we not cover? What do we cover well? What do we not cover well? We want you to think along the lines of how could this be done better? How could the interests of my family, my neighborhood, my work colleagues be served better? So go ahead. There is a microphone that is wandering, and ask your questions, make your comments, make suggestions.
I have experience with a couple groups out of North Carolina. That have risen up after dailies in their communities basically got down to skeleton staffs. One of the things that those groups have found is that the investigative side is what the remaining newspaper can't do. They can basically do surface articles a couple days after the fact, and where these groups have actually stepped up. I'll give one example. In Asheville, last winter, I guess, we had a terrible water situation. The pipes froze, and nobody wanted to talk about it. And this group, led by several former newspaper writers, spent about 4 months and put together a long series of what the problem was, not necessarily trying to poke the person that was responsible, but how the things could get improved. And I think that kept the city of Asheville accountable. It certainly helped the people in the community. And I don't know if you see a role for your group as you grow in the next couple of years to do some of that work.
Question back, do you know how this group came about, how this investigation came about? And
The group-
follow-up
The
question?
group was created by a bunch of retired newspaper personnel. They raised some funds. They do a newsletter, and they've got a website, so you pay $100 a year to have access to it. But by making people pay a little bit, it puts a little skin in their game as well, that they care about this organization making it. I think it's the Asheville Watchdog is their name.
Okay. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but we don't have frozen water pipes here. Can you think of any issue that we have not covered here that you're really curious about?
Give me a second.
You can talk later, that's fine.
Well, I will say, one of my careers was in newspapers. Another career, I was a mayor and city council member. We were kept in check by having a good local weekly newspaper reporter at all our meetings. You knew somebody was going to check the finances, and I feel like that's gotten lost to a certain extent. We've gotten into personalities and such, and not so much all the boring agenda items that are the real important stuff. So I do wonder how much goes on at a city council level or a Sarasota County level that we would care about that, frankly, we just don't have people at the meeting to cover it.
Just a reporter to be there to look at the finances, essentially. Okay, great. Any other comments, suggestions, questions to the panelists?
What was really lacking is, in our community, is hard investigative reporting. We get stories, but we don't really get investigative reporting. We have so much going on. We've got issues at the city commission, the county commission. We've got development issues. There's a tension between development and the residents, and it goes on and on. But there is very little investigative reporting. So that's, I think, what we need here.
Any suggestion on how we could make investigative reporting possible? At
Without
WSLR
investigative
News?
reporting, we really don't know what's going on, right? That's what keeps the commissioners honest, or close to honest, or more nearly honest. You're the watchdogs. We who attend meetings and stay in touch, we're not getting down to the granular level of what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to say that I think investigative journalism is still kind of happening because on social media, there are a lot, the internet sleuthers, okay? They find out everything. They just take one little picture and then they find everything. It's just like, how do we pay them for their services if they are already doing the research and stuff like that to pull them into our newsroom? And the cost of living is going up. So what we would usually pay a journalist is not what we would pay them now. And it wouldn't give them a livable wage. So that's kind of a question that I have around that.
Okay, yes, and a follow-up remark on that. The sleuthers you mentioned, I run across here are activists usually. They're engaged in defending their neighborhood or in defending a principle, being active. Would you draw them into North End agents to actually report and write and publish?
Well, they're already reporting. They're doing video reports by themselves, but we just want to be able to pay them because, yes, we could invite them in to collaborate with us. That's great, and they can get publicity, but that doesn't pay the bills at the end of the day. And our newsroom is not a non-for-profit. It's us out there hustling to make dollars. So we know the value of a dollar, and we know what it takes to make ends meet. And so we want to make sure we're paying these people for their work that they're doing because they're worth it. So, yeah.
All right.
Hi, the Zieglers are literally a national and international news story. How should community media cover the Zieglers?
Ooh.
Yeah. That's a great
Well,
question. Yeah.
it's a question to this editor, I guess. It's a very local story. I may want to pass it first to Carrie.
Well, I can tell you how we did cover it, which was, yeah, it was a national story. So we had to be there. We covered the lead up to it. We covered the unredacted police report when it was reported by the Florida Center for Government Accountability. We covered the meeting and the rally and the calls for her to resign. We did not cover the subsequent meeting 2 weeks later, where more people were calling for her to resign again. Just felt like we have covered that. But we try not to get too granular with it. You still have to be fair, We are only reporting what we know because Bridget Ziegler still will not call me back. I call and text her regularly. She doesn't get back to me. So that is the point that you made, sir, about investigative journalism being very important. It is so important, but I feel like we only hear from some parts of the community, not the whole community. And certainly, like you said, Eric, government officials do not call us back. So it's tough, it's very tough. I don't think we should get into assailing someone's personal character or what someone does in the privacy of their own bedroom, but also there was a rape allegation there. But we haven't spoken to the alleged victim. I also reached out to the police to ask them why did you determine that it was likely consensual? What was it that made you come to that conclusion? How does and we can debate whether you should send your questions ahead of time or not, but I decided to send a few questions. Like, these are the things we're wondering about in the newsroom. The person who made the allegation said that she had been drinking all day. How does that affect consent? And what is the next step here if it turns out that, Bridget Ziegler then said, because we have to know all these details. She said that, she denied something that her husband had said in the report about a planned threesome happening. How does that affect the investigation? And they told me, we are not answering media requests at this time, as I told you before. So it's tough, it's tough. Like that is one story that I'd like to do about how did the police come to that conclusion? How do we pressure people when we get told no? When I say people, I mean sources of power, when they just shut us down and we don't have any other way in. It can be a bit of a closed door. And then I think for me, I just sit on it, I think about it, and I try again. I'll probably try the state attorney's office next week. I have some calls out to lawyers who are familiar with rape cases who could maybe speak about this, because I feel like we should be talking about that. That's one angle in the community aspect of it. Because like one of our kind of litmus tests is, does this affect other people? And certainly this issue affects other people, other women who are raped. You need to know what is considered rape in this county, what is considered consensual, and how did the police come to that conclusion? I think that affects a lot of people.
And to add on to Carrie's point, it's very difficult as a newsroom or as an editor to decide that enough is enough, and every TV station in the Tampa Bay area has covered exactly the same story. Every newspaper has covered the exact same story. It takes a lot of bravery for an editor to stop and say, you know what? We're not going to be the 13th version of that same story out there. We're going to turn our back and we're going to run off in a different direction and try to do an entirely different version of that. And you risk the audience uprising and saying that you're covering up and you're not you're not publishing these stories. It becomes very easy just to say, okay, all right, we'll do that too, just to have the same story that everybody else does. You're not telling anybody anything different. you know what you've got isn't anything new or vastly updated from anybody else. There is sort of this urge to just do it anyway, but I love what Carrie said about maybe going off and talking to women and seeing what, an entirely different version of the same story, but using that sort of as a jumping in point. Those are the kinds of decisions that get made in newsrooms every single day, whether it's taking a local story that has been done and done and done and deciding that there's a different way to do it, or taking a world story and figuring out a way that you can do it yourself, that again, isn't the same thing that everybody else has been and doing.
Frankly, I've been working against what I'm hearing from the people around me in covering the Zieglers. And that's, a lot of people were just thoroughly entertained and they wanted to hear every detail about it. I thought there were two angles to it that made sense, and this is how we started covering the story, and that is the news was broken by one of those new news animals. The Florida Center for Government Accountability is a fairly well-funded nonprofit, and they're doing amazing work. I mean, if you look at the impact this story has had, it's absolutely amazing. Then there's the stuff we have to cover because it has an effect on institutions. One is the Republican Party of Florida, which duly booted its chair. And the other one is the school board of Sarasota County. And that's where we took an angle of this is a distraction. There's a lot of noise, and the school board is not talking about the important things that are happening, such as shrinking student numbers in public schools because of private school vouchers. So we kind of took an angle of what's not happening and what's not being said on that story. All right, enough about the Zieglers. Any other questions, comments
If it were only so
about
easy.
how we cover things, how we should cover things, how we could cover things?
I'm curious from each of the panelists, when you're working on a story, especially an investigative story, but really any story, I guess, too, what percentage of your time and effort do you think you devote to social media versus traditional methods of gathering the news and learning information?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How much of your time do you actually spend mining all the gems that could be found on X, versus what might be found by calling the local administrator and being told no?
I personally, I haven't written in a while, but my work would definitely start off on social media. There are a couple of online investigative, I call them investigative journalists because they're still doing the work and they are getting behind the scenes. They're checking out the pictures, they're doing the research behind the scenes. I would check out with them first and see what they have to say. And then I would start doing research on my end. I would say I would probably spend about a good day seeing what they had to say about different things before I really started to put pen to paper and rolling stuff out while also doing my research on my end. And right, I also have the ability and the privilege to be able to speak with different people in power because I do have a press badge too. So I'm also able to ask questions that other people would not be able to ask. So, yeah.
The role of social media in your investigations.
I'm trying to think of an example where that was a thing. And I'm having trouble thinking of a good example where there was material that was of great value that was found nowhere else but on social media. And the trick about social media is that it's kind of like, we'll probably maybe talk about this a little bit later on, but there's the gold standard in journalism is literally talking to people either face-to-face or on the telephone. You know who you're talking to, you can gauge their reaction, you can do a million things talking to somebody face-to-face or talking on the phone that you simply can't do in sort of the disembodied voice of social media or email or anything like that. I think one of the biggest dangers in social media is that you don't know that's actually the person who controls that account doing the words. It may be their account and it may be verified and it could easily be a communications person writing for their boss. So it's a little dangerous to start quoting social media as if you know exactly that's the person. As a reporter and as an editor, I honestly can't give you an example of a time where there was valuable material that was available through social media that was the only place we could find it. I wonder if that was the case, what we would do. I mean, sometimes there are tweets and things that are useful in the furtherance of the reporting, but using it as sort of the primary source of reporting when you don't know a whole lot else, that makes me very nervous.
I'm sorry. I just want to say one little thing. Okay. I respect your views. So on Instagram, there's a gentleman. His name is That Guy Danish, and he is amazing. I love that guy so much. He specifically focuses on Black people who are being mistreated and racially profiled in different experiences, and he gets all the video content from those people. Then he finds other examples of how they have been racial profiling in other instances, and he will give you a full comprehensive layout of the person and why they have actually what kind of like will be their motive behind it. And during COVID, he was bringing a bit of justice to people. And social media justice is different because it's instantaneous. You can't escape it. And he will source back to the person's personal page. And then that person would feel the wrath of, a lot of people. But at the same time, they are getting their comeuppance at this, like, just right there. It's so perfect. There was a gentleman who jumped on the back of a woman's car for no reason, broke the glass out of her window, and her baby was in the back seat. And so she got out and she was like, why are you doing this? And they had a little tussle in the street, and she eventually got her baby out of the back of the car. And his other friends, the biker gang, went to go assist him so that she couldn't fight back. And so she had to leave her car in the street and carry her baby off in her arms. And That Guy Danish actually did the work with his online community to find who this gentleman was who did this, find out anything that he might have done related to this in the past, searched his police records or anything like that, pull them up so that you could see the police records yourself too, so you know that this was a reputable source. And it blew our minds to be able to see that, like, instantaneous justice like that. It was beautiful. So social media is very powerful, and especially Instagram and TikTok on whistleblowing on a lot of the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So it may not be the first place that you look for data, but it should not be discounted when you are putting together investigative journalist articles.
Thank you. Carrie, any
It's
social
really
media
interesting.
in your
It's really interesting.
research?
Personally, I read a lot, I scan a lot, things like Popular Information by Judd Legum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's got a lot of really good information on there. So sometimes I get ideas from social media, but the reporting has to be with source documents and talking to actual people to flesh it out. So we don't rely on it too much.
Yeah, we're just barely beginning to get into investigative reporting. We're struggling just to catch up with the day-to-day county, city, commission, school board meetings. We're beginning to get into it. We covered a case recently in which a 36-year-old resident of Palmetto, the city just north of Bradenton, he had a history of mental health issues, was suffering an episode. People called 911, telling the police that he has mental health challenges. The police came, and a day later he was dead. And the police had been withholding the report about that incident pending an investigation by the state of Florida. That investigation is still ongoing 3 months into the incident. The family and activists who were alerted by that family produced a video taken by bystanders. And it showed police punching him once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. The activists took this video to the city commission of Palmetto, and there was an amazing meeting on Monday last week in which there was back and forth. They had a chance to show that video, and 2 of the commissioners proceeded to issue an apology to that family. So we do not have that guy Danish here, but we do have people who record videos. We decided to use it because it showed the location where the incident happened, and it would be very difficult to fake a video showing Palmetto police at that location being active. So we decided to go ahead and play the actual sound of that video in our radio report. Go ahead. It's your turn.
Regarding media silos, I know there's many news media
Silos, you're saying?
media silos.
Okay.
Okay, where some news media reports things that confirms the views of their readers, and readers like that. And there's other news media that tries to do balanced reporting. I'm wondering, between those 2 types of media, which one is more numerous as far as, well, let's say how many readers they have, and which one is growing faster than the other one or declining less than the other one? I mean, which is advancing and which type of media is declining?
So obviously, none of our organizations are part of a silo, so the question is about everybody else. What do you think about media silos and just working within an echo chamber? Any thoughts about that?
It's a huge challenge. You know, I think that people often see NPR as liberal media, and if they don't like something that the network reports, Steven Skeep was tweeting about it today, the story about Israelis being removed from their homes, and somebody wrote to him and said, "How dare you? How could you care about Israelis at a time like this when so many Gazans have died?" I don't understand what's happening to people out there, that they can't hold 2 things in their brain at one time. Of course, we cover all kinds of different things. So yeah, people like to be reinforced. They like to read what they agree with, and I feel like it's a very dangerous slope that we've really slid pretty far down. I don't know if I can answer your question in terms of which is gaining faster, but I sure would like to have more people listening to NPR who are from all walks of life and all kinds of beliefs, because I don't set out to report only for liberals, not at all. I mean, you know, it's very far from what we're trying to do is tell the truth, give an accurate representation of what's actually happening. But I think that the way that people consume their media now is they don't go to the website, maybe they don't buy the newspaper, maybe they do, hopefully they do, but it's given to them. So it's given to them in their social media feeds, and it's a self-reinforcing problem.
Oh, we're asking what medium for news is growing the fastest, right?
Yeah, whether it's organizations that essentially give their listeners or readers what they're yearning for.
I feel like that's a really tough question. I feel like she answered it really well. But you can't please everybody with the media that you're sharing, and so we try to make sure we represent and leave room for everybody to follow their own beliefs. In spirituality, talking about spirituality, that's one example we can talk about, is the Black community is very spiritual. They are very religious, I would say. But when you're bringing in new generations who are trying to explore new things like spirituality, the woo-woo stuff, maybe they want to do sound bowls and Reiki and stuff like that and get into healing. When you talk about those things, you definitely have some pushback. We definitely had a lot of pushback when we started to open up to representing, and because we want to make sure we represent the Black and brown experience in its entirety. And so to do that, we had to kind of step into this new arena, and we lost a couple of people, which was tough, but we knew that what we were doing was right because people could see themselves in our paper, and the younger generation could see themselves in our paper. And also people who are deciding to explore and try new things can see themselves in our paper. So we still, it's a panhandle balance. We still do some of this and we still do some of that. So just balancing things out.
Eric, the Community News Collaborative is doing the exact opposite. You're looking for the stories that no one else really yearns for. So any comment about?
And not only that, but then we don't really have any, once we've produced it, once we've made it available to our partners, we don't have any control over where it goes and how it's presented. We deliver completed packages of stories and photos or audio or what have you. We're often surprised at the presentation in print or online. Not bad. I'm just saying that sometimes we're like, wow, that story got a lot bigger play than I would have expected it to. I don't have an answer to
Your roundabouts made it to the front page of the Herald Tribune.
Nothing pleases me more than a good roundabout story, quite frankly. I could do roundabout stories from now until the end of time. But I don't have an answer to the question of whether the media is what we would probably up here consider the traditional media of, like Indira said, to see yourself in the media from time to time, I think is a very good goal. I think it often takes a little bit of looking around and realizing that, oops, we're looking a little bit one way or the other from time to time and making sure that doesn't happen. One little old newspaper story that I must tell you, my early days in the big company Gannett, we had literally a corporate, and this was probably in the 80s and 90s, a corporate edict that we will do exactly that. We will show different voices and different people. The problem was that we were literally graded on how many Black people we had in the newspaper, or how many sources of color we had in stories. The idea was wonderful. It made a lot of sense. The execution was often horrible. I believe the worst example I could think of was there was a cold night, some manatees died, and some well-meaning but somewhat blundering reporter called the president of the NAACP for a comment on dead manatees. She thought she was doing the right thing, but it just, the execution was horrible. So
What do you mean by that? It just sounded a little
question.
weird when you said it.
that was not the intention of the program. The program was meant to include voices from all around in different kinds of stories and in different kinds of settings, not a cop story in the middle of the night where manatees were dying, and the first thing he thought of was to call the NAACP president for a comment on dead manatees.
So you're saying that Black journalists would just call NAACP all the time? I don't know.
No, I'm just saying it was an odd source for a story like that.
Okay. I mean, like, that was one story that tanked the whole thing for you?
No, but I'm just saying that was an example of bad execution.
Okay.
All right. So silo, echo chamber, our constituents, our listeners really want, the most emotional story here is development, new construction. People get really anxious when a project is going up in downtown or near their neighborhood. It's very tempting to just follow that anxiety and cover the angle of terrible plan, bad idea. But I'll give you an example of when we get the other side of the story. Sarasota Housing Authority is getting ready to build hundreds of public housing units in this area. The first reaction that came to us was they're cutting down more than 100 trees for one particular project. There was no other reaction by our usual constituents, but in Newtown, when we go there, where the public housing project is going up, there is general support, even excitement about that. So we have to cover every angle of this, and we're trying not to fall into the echo chamber. All right, it's another 15 minutes. I would love you to focus on the possibility of you all actually being reporters, being journalists. If you were a journalist, if you were a reporter, what would you like to do and how would you do it? And how could we help you do it? It's quite a challenge.
Hi. My comment actually may be related to what you just said, but I wanted to go back to something that Carrie talked about in her example with sort of finding out this information about how many parents have asked,
Okay.
not to have their kids read in the library and so forth. I would love to read a story about how difficult that information is to get, because I think the perception is that, there's FOIA, or, there's sunshine laws, or there's, like, all of this information is obtainable, but really how it's slow-rolled, or how it's obfuscated, or how it's redacted, right? Mm-hmm. And then sort of talking about or probing a little bit, or getting people to think about, whose interest does that serve? Right? Mm-hmm. Kind of like what Eric was saying about follow the money, right? Sort of, to whose benefit is that working? Mm-hmm. Certainly not yours trying to find that information out, and certainly not me as a citizen or, a parent in the school district. Mm-hmm. So without sort of having, sort of a lesson in research, right? That's not what I'm sort of saying. I'm just like, the story is like, why is this information so hard to get? And here's the example of the roadblocks that you sort of would encounter. And the second thing, just as a follow-up on that, it strikes me that like some energetic students would be great interns to call all the middle schools in Florida. I mean,
We
so
have
I
them.
mean, and I understand, I get it, like, there's funding, I understand all that,
But
and-
you could do it.
and,
It's
but-
possible. right,
Absolutely,
yeah,
or
yeah.
alternately, could someone, citizen journalists, say, hey, I need someone to, take an hour this week and call as many middle schools as you can and let me know what you find out, or, something like that. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Great,
Yeah,
okay.
that's great.
So, two angles here.
There-
Angle number one, the story behind the story that didn't happen and why. And the other one is, would you mobilize community to cover a story?
Something you said reminded me of something. Just the other day, I was reading on the New College newspaper's website. There was a fascinating story of, I think it was maybe the editor of the New College paper, had been trying to get an interview with the president. Was it a reporter? Okay. Was trying to get an interview with the president of the college. And oh, you're scheduled at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Oh, you get there and it's canceled. And evidently it had happened a couple of times and finally this reporter wrote the most fascinating sort of blow by blow, this meeting was canceled, this appointment was set, but then nobody showed up. She ran into the president in line at lunch and he was wonderful and gracious and asked her about her classes and so forth. And then she called the office back, oh, nope, he's not available. And then he was speaking to one of the local TV channels during a period of time where he was supposed to be speaking to her. It was kind of like a Seinfeld episode. It was a story about nothing, but it was fascinating that the lengths and breadths that the college was going to avoid sitting the president down with this one report. And that was what the story was about. So it doesn't always have to be some sort of high-minded piece of journalism. This was just essentially a date planner with verbs that went from here to there to there to there, kind of like a family circus cartoon, that you really got the sense that this guy doesn't want to talk to her at all.
All right, shout out to the catalyst here.
Maria.
And there, I'm sure you have lots to say about mobilizing community to cover stories.
Yes. So Northern Asians actually pulls in our community to do stories for us often because we want to make sure we're covering the Black and Brown experience broadly. So we usually ask people to come in and write about an experience that they're more informed about. And the goal is we tell them to write about something that they're passionate about, that they're enthusiastic about, because when you're passionate and you're enthusiastic about it, you're going to want to stay with it. And that means that when the editing process comes, you're not going to die on me. So that ends up working out really well. And yeah, I think that's how a lot of our community journalism works out. Yeah.
We
Carrie.
do that sometimes. We'll have a call out where we ask people to weigh in on a certain issue. So last year when Florida banned the AP African American Studies course, we put out a call for people just to say, we said, on the air, Florida has just banned an AP African American Studies course. It's Black History Month. We want to know what Black history means to you. Have you had an experience that was formed by a moment in Black history? Are you a teacher, educator, a member of the community who'd like to weigh in? And we had this really great series of like 12 people of all different colors talking about all kinds of different things. It was like the most interesting story path because it was nothing that I would have found on my own. It was just asking people. And then we put together like an audio postcard of them talking in their own words about what they wanted to talk about. And I would love to do more of that.
Yeah, I listened to your news this morning. There was a call for people who have been outbid by investment funds
Yes.
in the purchase of a home.
Yep.
That's
That's
a
what we're
really
looking for
interesting
now.
example of mobilizing feedback. All right, we've got 2 or 3 minutes left. In other words, one more question and we'll call it a day.
This is not a question, just a comment, real quick, on what Eric was saying about the Catalyst story, which was written by a thesis student named Chloe Rusick. And that went on for 2 months. of her every day going there or calling or texting or whatever it was. And the importance of that story, which did get a lot of reaction, was that it was emblematic of what we experience every day, of the, without ever having to say, you know, make a generalization about the administration and their communications department, which has shut down any kind of communication with our reporters. And, you know, I've been the sponsor of that paper for 29 years. And what's happened since January 2026 is unprecedented. But we really couldn't get at it in the way that would grab people until Chloe brought it to that personal experience, which does represent what all of our reporters have been facing.
And I think what got me, it was so even-handed and so calm, and Sergeant Joe Friday, just the facts, ma'am, that's what, if it had been shrill it would have lost its impact, but it was just so matter-of-fact that it was, y'all should read it. It's a wonderful piece.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope we'll see you again. Please listen to WSLR News, and all these other great news organizations are at your service. See you soon.